there is something in the fact that you need to just make a demonstrable difference early on.
Yeah.
Because although you kind of got this wonderful honeymoon period, but
Yeah.
that expires quite quickly. It's interesting.
Yes.
I'm experiencing at the moment a period where we're on the other side of a lot of transformation. We changed some stuff, and it's all for the better. But that halo has faded quite quickly, and actually people are now
Yeah.
looking at the stuff that doesn't work again. And so you have to continue to be looking at what is the next thing that needs to be improved.
Welcome to CTIO 101 Episode 1, Transform Everything.
My name is Ollie. I'm a CTO of a large law firm in the City of London. I've been working in law firms for lots of years and found myself working in IT about 10 years ago, working for a very large law firm, and had the pleasure of working alongside you, John, for the last few years of my time at that particular firm, and then joined my current firm in 2018, where I've been leading the technology departments and absolutely loving my time there. It's been absolutely brilliant.
It's a midweek evening. I know these are really precious times. I also know that you've had a busy day, and I think successfully put the children to bed.
2 children are sleeping upstairs. I have now returned from being in a darkened room where I sat there for 15 minutes just in silence, scrolling on Twitter, praying that they were asleep. And just for proof for the audience, there's 2 baby monitors right here, which I can confirm. They're not on the Wi-Fi. They're not on an unsecured network. They're completely independent.
Okay. And obviously, Ollie, it's very important for you to listen out for your children. But for the purpose of the recording, you've obviously switched both of those off, so we won't be interrupted.
Well, I'm not going to let the children get in the way of this.
No. So just anyone's worried at all if that monitor goes off, that's obviously
if that monitor goes off, they're getting turned off. Okay.
Good. I think that's really solid advice. Any young parent would like to hear.
People ask me how I manage to juggle work and life.
I'm a little bit at the other end of the spectrum now with the children, Ollie, and I find that I'm the first to go to bed now. So the kids go to bed way after me. That's where you're headed. I suppose eventually they'll put you to bed and you'll be on a monitor. I mean, I'm just waiting for that.
Could you imagine?
For that stage?
That would be so nice
to come. It's coming. It's definitely coming. So Ollie, your question really intrigued me because you never know quite what you're speaking to a CTO, what they're going to ask, what they're going to suggest, and make sure I've got this right. But the way you framed the question was, how do you transform everything? Or I think you were describing a scenario where you walk in and it just feels very much like everything's got to transform, and transform would imply a pretty big change. So before we get going, is that the kind of thought experiment you set up with which you wanted to kind of explore?
Well, it's a deliberately provocative title, but yeah. I thought about the name of the channel, and I was thinking about my experience of the first time that I've headed up the whole of the IT, the technology function, and my experience of that and what I learned from it. So it's a bit clickbaity, but I'm sure we'll dig into that as we go on.
No, that's cool. So I suppose that's be the first thing to tackle then. So we're talking about transforming everything, from a technology point of view or any business perspective. We don't have unlimited resources, so we can't literally start everywhere all at once. So I suppose it infers we've got to start somewhere, and that means there needs to be some kind of selection. So, if you were to give some CIOs, CTOs, folks, peers on the channel some of your experience about where to start, how do you even decide? I mean, what's your process or your experience on where to actually get started?
So my experience was to start out by talking to as many people that will give you their time as you can. The sort of classic bit of advice is spend the first 2-3 months just listening. In the industry that I work in, that's probably a little bit too long, and you probably want to be able to make a difference a little bit sooner than that. But my focus was speak to as many people as would give me their time, hear what their frustrations were, what they thought was working well, what wasn't working well, and try and divine from that what the priorities were, and probably work out what's the stuff that were there a few changes you could make early on to demonstrate that you're making a difference. Because the truth is, for any big technology transformation, there's going to be this huge complex sequence of changes that are required before you can deliver the big change that you want to get to. So if you wanted to change a particular core application, you might suddenly find you've got to change the devices they sit on, the security platform that they're sat on, the infrastructure, and all of a sudden you're staring down the barrel of a 2-3 year transformation program. But you need to make a difference quite early on. So it might be something as small as, actually people find the whole music to tech support really irritating. Okay, cool, let's just do something about that. Or people find that the video conferencing tool that you're using is rubbish. Okay, let's just see how we can replace that early on. So it was a case of listing.
And Ollie, just on that point of the music on hold, yeah. So some folks who are listening will go, well, that's really easy to do. But one of the things you're doing two things is A, it can genuinely wind people up. I mean, particularly in the sector you're in, yeah, where everything that's front of house is very highly scrutinized in that industry. But the second thing is that if you're listening to someone and you can make that change, and maybe they've been going on about it for the last 3 years, you're also indicating back to the business that you can actually make a change. Because I think in some environments, the business sort of loses faith that anything can change. Do you see what I mean? So there's the actual value of the change you talked about, and then there's this sort of other value, which is saying, yeah, we have made a bit. I mean, obviously, you can't hang your hat up, though. I don't think you're suggesting, Ollie, that once you change the music on hold, you were done. And that's the big shocker, everyone. That's how we're defining transformation.
It's a 3-year strategy.
Anything beyond changing the music on hold is just beyond our comprehension. But that's a big change.
But there is something in the fact that you need to just make a demonstrable difference early on.
Yeah.
Because although you kind of got this wonderful honeymoon period, but that expires quite quickly. It's interesting. Yes. I'm experiencing at the moment a period where we're on the other side of a lot of transformation. We changed some stuff and it's all for the better. But that halo has faded quite quickly. And actually people are now looking at the stuff that doesn't work again. And so you have to continue to be looking at what is the next thing that needs to be improved.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this at length when we worked together about change that you make that gets rapidly forgotten. And if you remember, we drew this pyramid. It was really ripping off Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Is that the one where we put Wi-Fi at the bottom of it?
That's right. Yeah. Well, we basically I described a squeaky door. Yeah. People complain about a squeaky door. And then when you fix it, people don't open the door and go, wow, that door didn't squeak. They just forget and move on to the either more squeaky doors or they move up to other things. Yeah. So I suppose, it's quite harsh, but if your folks are complaining about things that are a bit higher up that pyramid, if that makes sense, it's kind of progress because they're no longer complaining about the basics, although they will have forgotten about all of that, like goldfish.
Yeah, people don't have a list of things that don't irritate them.
Yeah. Actually, but that would be a really good thing to ask people, wouldn't it? I think that would be quite disarming.
Give me the top 10 things that you think are already really good.
Yes, or just things that don't irritate you, so we can direct our efforts. When you were talking about this, to get the big changes at the end, it's a really big build-up. So again, classic consulting matrix is the sort of effort versus value. You draw your matrix. Things with high effort, high value are the big things you typically have to deliver later on. High value, low effort is that horrible cliche, low hanging fruit.
The quick wins.
Yeah. And then you've got your high effort, low value, which is, okay, the program is working on nugatory stuff.
Vanity projects.
It's not really, vanity projects, that sort of thing. And it's late. I can't remember the fourth quadrant, but those two quadrants aren't really worth
you can quickly deliver no value.
Yes. But the reason why I'm mentioning that is because when you talked about how do you transform everything, when you speak to a business that has, significant different groups in it, it's not that one group will totally empathize with you about the total demand.
Yeah.
So actually, a lot of different groups within a business will kind of see transformation just through their goggles, their blinkers, which is quite right because they're meant to be focused on their area. But how do you say, or how do you govern, or how do you influence the fact that actually out of all that demand, of which you can't satisfy all of it at once, some of it you might never ever be able to get to, how do you determine that one group's kind of request is actually of a higher value to another group's? Because that, I think, is a challenge for the modern CTO, CIO. Is, this is our change program. We're making all this technology change, but you've always got the observation and potential criticism to say, well, that's great, but that's got nothing to do with my division or my business unit. So do you see what I mean? There's a real challenge there. I don't know if you've come across that.
It's interesting. If I think about the industry that I'm in, there's kind of two layers to it. There's the core layer, which is the stuff that everybody uses. And then there's the specialist layer, where you have more differentiation based on the division, as you talk about. The focus for me over the first sort of 2 to 3 years is very much on the core layer. So I was fortunate enough to be able to build a team that was able to deliver value to everybody. But now we're into the more of the specialist layer, and the team there are focused on, as you say, trying to work out who they need. How do you spend your resources as effectively as possible? How do you prioritize? There's probably the commercial answer would be the areas that are most profitable for the business. And then there's the reality, which is your horse trading a little bit, working out politically what's the most effective way to deploy limited resources. I'm quite fortunate the organization that I'm in, actually, where we focus our energy, we're able to deliver value to most areas. So we don't have to do too much of that horse trading. But as you were talking, I was reminded of the book, and I'm going to put you on the spot, John. What was the book that we collectively read as a function many years ago, the DevOps book?
Well, we had there was the Phoenix
That's
Project,
it.
and then there was
The Phoenix Project.
and then there was the DevOps Handbook,
Yeah.
but the Phoenix Project was the one that we.
So that actually was very good, wasn't it, in the way that it described about how you used various methodologies for prioritization. But even that ultimately was a little bit in fantasy land.
And we'll put an affiliate link.
Could we? If we could get 1 cent for every copy of that book that is sold.
Yeah.
It's a good book, It was a good book.
It is a good book. Well, so you just mentioned it. So Jen, now I'm going to do this from memory, but for the Phoenix Project, there's 4 categories of work. There's business projects. Mm-hmm. They're the ones that obviously the business would identify with. Yeah. Then you've got your technology projects, which could be, the underlying infrastructure, cloud, whatever, and they are always there to either enable a business project, or they might be enabling compliance or, security, that sort of thing. So those are the two that are pretty obvious. Then there's a third one, which is called unplanned work.
Mm-hmm. That was your favorite.
In the context that, in the context of the Phoenix Project, I think unplanned work was about systems that were not working particularly well, sort of almost like the incidents.
Yeah.
But actually, I think we all also experience unplanned projects. So projects that arrive in a very short time scale, they're extremely important, and then they sort of pass. And then the fourth one, which I think I thought was really insightful, is the amount of effort you need to put aside for change. And when I mean change, Ollie, I don't mean the CAB process.
That's the change advisory board.
Like
just
so
everyone knows.
Designing it, requirements, determining it. Sorry, Ollie, I missed that.
I don't want you to get away with your TLAs.
Yeah, indeed. But that was the 4 areas. And I think when you're speaking to a business, they can totally get the business projects. Yeah, they could probably get the technology projects if you can explain it to them, the link. I think they'll find the change in design and architecture a little bit esoteric. And obviously the incident stuff is about making it visible.
Yeah.
Otherwise it'll be, well, what do you guys do all the time? You just sort of, don't you just switch things off and on again, which actually is quite accurate. I mean, that's probably very powerful.
Do you know what's quite disappointing is I genuinely think a reboot probably solves, what do you reckon, 75% of issues?
Yes.
That's the.
But what they do is they obviously resolve the presenting incident. Yeah. But they don't then get rid of the
root cause,
underlying problem.
Absolutely.
Problem management with a capital P, folks, for all you ITIL
But John,
folks out
so
there.
what's been your experience? You've worked in more businesses than I have. How do you figure out where you
start?
Or when you've got multiple people that are very influential shouting at you?
So where I've got to, Ollie, and it changes, as you sort of move into different contexts, but where I'm at now I'm in my 5th year of sitting on this side of the table, is that I'm finding that I need to come up with a design of my own. So 100% talk to the business, all the elements that you've just described, to make sure you understand what's important, what are people talking about, all the rest of it. But have that against also a design basis. I mean, another way of putting it would be to say to put together a product. So if you think about a tennis racket, if we designed a tennis racket by committee, it would you'd probably describe it to someone who couldn't see it, and it would sound like a tennis racket. But then if you looked at it, it would be really weird, 2 handles and all the rest of it. So I think you take all those requirements in, but I think the really big difference is to then take a step back and do some design and have, if you like, a product. Yeah, when I say a product, what I mean is some sort of core that you're going to build that you're no longer going to ask for requirements for. This is just, what you can do. There's a bit of compromise in there. So I'd say that would be one. I think the other one that works quite well, it doesn't work. I don't think it works long term, but I think when you get that moment when everyone is screaming for effectively the same resource, that scoring exercise you can do, in the legal sector, you might score on compliance and client and cash and velocity of cases, all that sort of stuff. That kind of, I think we use the Fibonacci sequence. I can't quite remember why, but remember when there was that kind of long list. But that's really difficult, I think, to maintain on a regular basis. But I think it's useful when you get that moment when the business says, hang on a minute, what are our current priorities?
It's hard though, isn't it? Because you can use scientific methodologies, but at the end of the day, you're having to deal with human personalities, and that's the really hard thing.
Business isn't science, except for when you're creating vaccines, and then literally business is science. But I know there's always an exception to every sweeping statement I make. But I think you're right. But business isn't precise, and somehow when it arrives at the transformation desk, we've got to turn it into, well, I was going to say something tangible, which is ironic because we really deal in complete intangibles, because you can't really see what we do. We don't make furniture. We execute code, or we put things together. But there is some sort of art versus science bit to it, bit of judgment. It's a real cauldron, isn't it?
Do you know what? I'm suddenly reminded of a bit of advice that our former boss gave us when I first started in my more senior role, which is, now you've got to figure out who you want to piss off the least. I thought that's probably fairly accurate, isn't it?
And actually least worst. And that's actually a linear programming technique. So that does work. Okay, what about? I wanted to talk about transformation and how we would define it, but I don't think it's worth just talking about a transformation definition. But so what I wanted to do is do it in the context of a second question, which is, what if you're looking at the problem, or the challenge or whatever, and it just is too complicated? How do you start? And obviously, where I'm driving at, Ollie, is how do we simplify? What was it? The French.
You're going to do your
French
priority little.
No. The French mathematician said, "Apologies for the length of this letter. It would have been a lot shorter had I had longer to write it." And everyone listening or watching, I will credit that. I will credit that. He's a 16th or 17th century French mathematician.
Can we genuinely come back to that? Because I think there's something really important about communication.
I will take a note of that.
And I'm going to answer a question that you didn't ask me, which is, what is transformation? And let's be honest, it's just a fancy word for change. And I think it's interesting. I've become more aware of not using certain words that you hear quite a lot in our technical domain, because they can actually put you in a position where you are ultimately going to always under-deliver. So again, back to my sort of clickbaity headline, when you need to transform everything, it's probably more, there's loads of stuff you need to change. I think,
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. So it's a fancy word for change. It's probably suggesting scale, though, isn't it? I mean, in the true sense, I think it's used as a throwaway. So people are using it a bit like, dare I say it, the word digital. It sort of becomes its own weird brand.
Digital.
Yeah.
Wait for it. Transformation.
Hang on a minute, Ollie. Are you just putting those two words together there? Boom. Yeah. I think we could do an episode just filled with the two of us just saying words that I know. Cloud. There you go.
Words that can I give you one? I remember speaking to a vendor. Hang on, John, have you not got your phone on silent? It's embarrassing for you.
Pinging me.
Hold on. One of my favorite beers is actually a mid to low strength alcohol beer called Small Beer. It's available at Ocado, Waitrose.
Ollie, we'll put an affiliate link in there, and anyone who's interested in following that.
This is because I drink so much small. It makes me sound like I drink a lot, but because I regularly drink small beer, I've actually got a small beer glass. Unfortunately, can you believe I washed it so many times? The logo's not even on here.
That is.
This is a small beer lager.
Delicious.
So, cheers. Sorry, John. What's the question? What we're talking about?
No, it's absolutely fine. We're talking about transformation.
Yes.
No, I know. I'm joking. So, okay, here's one to throw in. And remember, you wanted to go back to comms.
Yes.
Yeah, at some point.
I genuinely think.
I don't know if you want to do that now. I do.
This
apologize.
is really off script. Is this going into the podcast?
This is. Shall I keep your tea in the oven? Keeping it real.
Tea?
I'll say yes.
Yes, please. Yes. To be fair, I've got some feel on the comms. Being in the technical discipline that we are in, and hopefully people that are watching or listening to this are in, you're most likely to have technical background.
Yeah.
But the ability to communicate is so critical at this leadership level. So learning how to communicate, obviously when we speak, we're communicating, but in particular written comms, because your written comms are the ones that go to the widest audience, is absolutely crucial. And try not to get drawn into overly detailed, overly technical communications, because people don't read them. And the industry that we work in, everyone writes really long emails.
So just a couple of things on that, Ollie. So first thing is, everyone should know that Ollie is actually, in my opinion, a bit of a master at this. Obviously, to be CTO, you've got to be able to cover things in the 360, but we've all got things that we have mastery at. And Ollie, I just think hats off to you. You're very, very good at getting the complicated story, not just in presenting, but in the written. So that's something I think you've got really strong mastery in.
Stop it.
Now, if I can just give you a little anecdote of a big firm you and I both worked at, I was in the unfortunate situation where there was a service outage. And the comms, the little comms that goes out, to everyone.
You didn't get everything wrong, did you?
It was written by someone else, but they put my name at the bottom. And when I read it, it was like, it was really quite. I mean, I noticed how bad it was. That's how bad it was. But in a firm that has a lot of people that are into detail and
grammar,
and grammar and all the rest of it, that really, really was a bit of a body blow.
Yeah.
So my advice would be also, if you're going to put your name to something, you do need to make sure that's coming from you.
Do you know what? Yeah, I know we did. I know this isn't the purpose of this podcast, but tips: or write your own slides, write your own comms. Genuinely, even if you've got people that can do it for you, just do it yourself.
You're right.
Know your stuff.
It makes it, because it's authentic, isn't it? The worst thing is you see someone sat there trying to force out the words that have come from someone else. Or, if you're a confident leader, get the person who's really good at writing those notes to deliver it themselves. It gives them some profile. You're, spreading things across the team. You should definitely, I think that's a very, very good.
Yeah.
I think the days of having comms person on a stick, those are probably, they probably happen still a lot, but I think that's probably one of the differentiators.
I think in our roles, it's really important that you take the opportunity to craft a sort of a tone of voice, if you can, and have consistency in that. And actually, one of the things that I talk about quite a bit with my team is the best examples of this happen in the consumer world. So if you look at how modern businesses communicate with their people, it's super user-friendly, super easy to read. You can read it on your phone. There's an action to take straight away. We should just learn from that. And that's what we try to recreate.
It's not dissimilar to, the world that I'm just starting in, which is the sort of the short form video, the podcast and the written form. It's you would imagine that that's something that probably is already replicated in some businesses already.
Well, how often do you hear, I'm too busy to go to training? Okay. What if we just send you an email with, here are the 2 things that you need to do? We put it as an animated GIF in there.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I have also heard the response, John, if this system requires any training at all, it's too complicated. You know what I mean? I've heard that.
There's some merit in that.
I think they had a point. We were talking about a phone. I mean, they did actually have a point.
Physical.
Yeah, I was like, well, I'm glad you said that, because I don't really think we need to train folks who need to be trained to use a phone. Has probably got a different issue, maybe. I don't know. But a quick one for you. So there was a statistic ages ago. It said something like, 90% of transformations fail. Yeah. But the 10% that are successful, of that 10%, so apologies with that, the number crunching here. So that 10% that are successful, some very high majority, 70, 80% actually then do harm to the company. So that's the kind of, you're only meant to blow the bloody doors off sort of thing. So we're going right to the other end of transformation, which is where you make this change, you suddenly become successful in making the change. And then there is this sort of other feedback, which is this change actually working? And have we got a feedback loop so that if we need to adjust, course correct, I think that was a phrase you used to use, Ali, I think, en route. So I don't know if you've had any of those views, or you got any example of where a transformation, the original idea, remember, it's a creative exercise. It's not precise science. You might get exactly what you wish for, but then you might find that that's not actually quite what we thought, school of unintended consequences.
Do you know what I'm doing right now? I'm Googling what is the antonyms for transformation. And one of them is leave alone, interestingly. But this,
that's good.
I feel like there's a word that's like the opposite of
leave alone.
Leave alone.
That could be in your single slide after your 3 months of speaking to everyone.
It's interesting. I'm suddenly thinking about generations of enterprise technology. And in the late 90s, early noughts, you had big enterprise systems that were largely bespoke. And they were built very specifically for the working practices of those businesses. So the industry that we work in, so the accounting systems that they use were very bespoke. And then you get to sort of 2010 period and the rise of the likes of Siebel, name some others, John. I'm having an absolute mind blank.
Well, Salesforce came a bit later, but Siebel,
Oracle,
PeopleSoft.
Yeah, exactly. Those
Pega.
Yeah. And
there's something Microsoft did something.
Yeah.
Microsoft Access.
There we go. And these big companies came along with monolithic applications that could do
SAP.
That's the badger.
Classic.
That's the badger. They could do everything. And to an extent they could, but they modernized, but to the end users, they took everything back. So that was the teen period. And it feels like we're now in this third generation where we're unpicking all of that and trying to get people back to the early noughts a bit.
Yeah, and I think this is about really understanding the scope and why you're doing it in the first place. So if you run a business where the way you order coffee is actually what makes customers go crazy, and it's a little bit unusual and non-obvious, then the last thing you want to do is homogenize that in an ERP system. Because what you're doing is you're vanillaizing. That's a word that doesn't exist. That's not a real word, folks. Don't look that one up. You're making it vanilla. Go on.
Sorry. And this isn't a professional podcast, is it? Can I tell you a word that I heard someone say on a business call recently?
I think it was worse than vanillaizing.
They used the word, the journification.
Journification?
Yeah. So the process of creating a journey.
Journification.
Yeah, write that down. That's one for you.
I am.
Yeah.
I like that. That can go in along with digital and transformation.
It's
I think journification, and we'll add on vanillaization just
Sorry.
because that was a regression.
Sorry to take off your train of thought there.
No. That's absolutely cool. So the point I'm making is the way they used to sell these big ERP systems is you just adopt the process that comes out of the box, and away you go. But actually some of those processes is what makes your business unique. So you've got to make sure the stuff that is commodity doesn't make any sense to do it any different. And in some businesses, it might be your purchase order process. But in other businesses, your PO process might be what makes the difference. It might be why you can secure super prices, or, if you're buying tickets, or, so I think that's the key. It's just, you can't take this monolithic approach. And I think if the ERP experiment had worked, every single company in the world now would be running exactly the same processes. And of course they don't. And that's that. I think actually that's a really good point, Ollie. I've looked very extensively at case management systems. And the big difference is some case management systems say, John, it's a whiteboard. It's blank. It's a blank sheet of paper. You can go wherever you want. And I'm thinking nightmare, because that's literally starting from scratch in all. The ones that excite me are the ones where they say, well, look, we've got a process X, Y, Z. It works. 80% is defined and you can tweak it. Or if you want, you can completely change it. But this is a different topic, but I'm not a big fan of as is, because I think when you get into as is, what you actually learn is that there is no real corporate memory. No one individual really understands what's actually going on end to end. And so when you do a load of as is analysis, it's like Time T. It's like an episode of Time T. So, you'll have to look that up, anyone who's looking outside of the UK. But you know what I mean? It's fascinating to document what the current process is, in the same way that you're hoping you're going to pull Arthur's sword out of the ground. But what's the real value of it? Isn't it better just to go on first principles and design from scratch?
So that's really interesting, isn't it? So here's a question. Why is it that Workday, for example, is proving to be far more successful than SAP? Because Workday theoretically is incredibly inflexible, right? So, by the way, the firm that I work for doesn't use Workday, but this is just what I understand from talking to peers. Incredibly successful, brings huge value to an organization, but ultimately it's incredibly inflexible. You buy into the way that they do things. Right.
You buy in the way of working.
Yeah. Whereas SAP is this sort of monolithic application that you bend to your will, but it never quite gets there somehow.
Yeah.
And it's like the sort of third generation of technology where maybe we learned the right way to do things. And then
that's right. And if we don't use, I don't have experience of Workday either. Maybe that'll be
another sponsor. If we can get an affiliate link,
might be interested in
if we get an affiliate link to
see.
Workday, where it's like a £300,000-400,000 implementation.
Is it? Well, look, we'll do a Workday. I think this is worth exploring, definitely, because what you probably want to do is you want to have a Workday type implementation for your processes that don't differentiate. Yeah. The ones that and then
best practice.
You want to get a much smaller section, which is, this is where we're going to make the difference. And that's where you might crack open the code. You might decide to do something really bespoke. You might try and get IP out of it, or a patent or something like that, but make it really small. But don't sit there with a blank sheet of paper trying to design everything, because that's just a nightmare.
So that's interesting. So strategy, one of the strategies that has emerged for us is you adopt really good enterprise mass market products.
Yeah.
And then where there are gaps in functionality, you build. So actually most enterprise products have APIs, right? So you can then build. Yes. So actually you fill the gaps and the limitations with custom products, but you hire really good software engineering talent. So you get the benefit of great user experience plus the functionality that you truly need, rather than just rubbish user experience.
And you mentioned APIs. So the next episode,
what does API stand for?
Application Programming Interface.
Good.
Thanks, Ollie. So I don't know. No, I believe that is what it stands for. I'm sure I'll be corrected. But the next episode, I've got an API specialist, because there's this API as a product is now a thing. And so what you're doing is you're saying, okay, what's the, I nearly said journification. What's our subjects? I didn't really, it's only because you planted it in my mind. What does our subject need to do? Yeah. And rather than say, oh, we'll have to write that, we'll have to write that, we'll have to write that, you've got this massive setup of lots of different systems. They've all got APIs, and you can satisfy nearly 90% of your journeys just by using other people's APIs. And it goes right back to code reuse. Yeah. And you must have been in dev teams where the second team has developed something that's already been written the year before by a different dev team. So reuse is not just about having the components, also about knowing where all the different bits of Lego are and what color they are, and having some sort of inventory of the different APIs. So this sort of API, come to us, send us this kind of message, we'll send you this kind of response. That's a much better way than writing it yourself, isn't it? And then you sort of put them all together like a sort of a patchwork. And so that's going to be, I think, possibly the next episode, which I might be recording on Wednesday evening, which is tomorrow, I think. But that was unexpected. But I was just interesting that you mentioned that.
Here's a question for you, John. How do you think that when you started your current role, you had the strategy straight away? And have you been faithful to that? Or has the strategy emerged over time?
Yeah.
And is it still emerging?
I'll tell you exactly what happened. I was on the train, Manchester, got off at Victoria, been there for 4 months, and literally just came to me, which was work anywhere, automate everything, and create. And so I worked out work anywhere was the context. This is pre-pandemic, but that turned out to be quite handy to work anywhere. The automate everything was just an automate first approach. And remember, there's different, automate everything won't work for every context, but work really strong with us. And then if you've got the automation, you've got positive and negative automation. Yeah. Positive automation creates opportunity. Negative is just very sort of reductive. So if you automate in the right way, you create capacity. And that was the create. And I've updated it very slightly. I've up-issued it. So I've got rid of the word create, and it's now innovate. And I'm possibly on the cusp of dropping the work. So it might just be called anywhere, automate, innovate. But then where do I go from there? I start dropping letters off. No.
You drop vowels.
Yeah, of course. Drop the vowels, register the website, and then away we go. But that was the sort of the three areas that sort of came to mind. And it was actually very specific to the context that we are in. So I would say it did sort of come to me in a bit of a flash, but it didn't come to me in a flash without obviously thinking really hard about the business and all. It didn't sort of, just literally appear from nowhere.
Guys, I've got it.
I've got it. I haven't spoken to anyone for 3 months. This is it. What do you think? And what was interesting is that kind of resonated with the technology team as well as the business. So, and that's quite good to get a kind of, the Americans call it the elevator speech. It's actually quite easy to rattle that off. But that was that. I think, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think you did. It's interesting. I'm finding that the strategy somehow it emerges in a way. It finds you a little bit, and I think I have been learning to be as humble as possible. So recognizing that what I think is the answer straight away is probably not going to be. And so having a vision of where you want to get to, but just being totally open to the fact that how you get there is going to change and evolve. So
absolutely.
And I think you were going to ask a question about storytelling, which is
that's right. Because go back to the point I said about where I think you are very, very, very strong on the communication side. So the question was, do you need to create and tell a story about transformation? Is that a useful thing to do?
Yeah, definitely. So if you read anything about communicating information, if you watch any TED Talks, anything that's super engaging, it's all about telling a story. And so the idea of setting the scene, talking about the opportunity, and then how you're going to get there, that's crucial. The way that I do it is just sort of the standard approach to how you communicate complex ideas through storytelling. One of the things that I find really useful, I've got a couple of tips that I find quite useful. One is the use of data is really helpful. So using data to back up or articulate your ideas is one. The other is when it comes to presenting ideas, I really encourage people to use PowerPoint as a presentation medium and not as a word processor. So I very often
can't send to read out the, you get the thick paragraphs. It's just like, well, we can all read. This isn't a read along.
I feel like in the industry that we work in, somebody once said it was a really, you write your presentation decks as pre-read handouts rather than as what goes up on the screen.
Yes.
And the challenge with that is people are listening to you reading the words that they're reading. They're not really paying attention to you. Whereas actually, if you've got a chart, then off you go. And also don't be afraid of having lots of slides because you can rattle through them at pace.
You can move. You don't have, and you don't have to show all of them. If you've got the room is really interested in a particular area, don't do the let's kill this conversation because I need to get to the end of my slide deck. Oh, just a quick question for you, Ollie. So there's this observation that people who view a house, the majority of people, I believe, prefer to see a furnished house. Nice, completely clean with coffee smells and bread baking in the background, but furnished. And then there is a smaller percentage of people who would actually prefer to see a completely empty house because they can visualize. And I often think that with the storytelling we do, a lot of technical people are a little bit more of the empty house and can visualize. And when that person is speaking to the person who needs to see the furnished house, there's a sort of an assumption that the other person can kind of see the vision when maybe they can't. So I've seen a few scenarios where I've thought, this group's really strong on the concept and they know they can close their eyes and imagine it, but this group really need to see it in black and white. Does that make sense? Because otherwise you end up with you can have a group of people getting really excited, another group are like, I don't have a clue what these guys in technology are talking about.
So pictures really help. Are we doing top tips? Should we do some just top tips? I don't even know if these are good top tips.
Well, one of it was going to be what's your transformation 101 advice.
Okay.
So, let's just go.
Firstly, I will caveat this by saying I've had the pleasure of working with a few large consultancies over the years. I'm telling you, it's just stuff that I've nicked from them. But one of the things you do is
they just nicked it from other people. Ollie. It's called plagiarism in academia and it's called reuse in business. So that's fine.
Actually, before I forget it, can I also have permission to tell an anecdote?
Yeah, of course.
So my anecdote is my current organization. I had imagine the scene. I'm in front of the board. I've got my first big presentation. This is it. This is my moment. This is what they're all looking forward to seeing. It's been here six months. Let's see what the guy's got. So I'm in the room talking to the strategy. It goes, I'm thinking, this is good. There's a couple of, there's no high fives. There's not even applause. Frankly, I just got a thank you. That's good enough. So I go downstairs. I'm feeling pretty good about myself. And then someone in my team goes, Ollie, there's been an email outage. I'm like, what? You joking? No, there'd been an email outage. And at the time we were using VDI product. You can imagine the VDI product of choice. It was probably the biggest major incident of the sort of last 18 months. It started while I was in the middle of doing that presentation. And I feel grateful that my team hadn't called me down for it because that would have somewhat undermined. But I then had to spend the next 4 hours firefighting that.
Nice. Nice.
So yes,
we've all. I think there'd be a lot of people watching this who've had days like that, and probably more than one.
I genuinely have been cursed every time I present to the board that something goes wrong. No tips. So how to present. One tip that I got was you create a slide that shows some images of the current way of working with little call outs of quotes. So, for example, I can't print at home. I can't get the data I need. My laptop's too heavy, whatever all those things are. So you create this little picture board that people recognize, they can relate to. So they see the words and the phrases that they imagine. And then you go to how could it look? And you just use imagery. So you show this is what it could look like. So John looking really happy on his iPad on a train. one device, or me in an airport lounge drinking a small beer with my iPhone, looking at emails. And
I think that's called drink anywhere,
Drink
isn't
Any-
it? Rather than work anywhere.
yeah, that's the strategy. Drink anywhere. It's become incredibly successful. But just the use of imagery, and that's back to telling stories. So I as a viewer of that presentation go, yeah, I recognize me in that scenario. Great, I can imagine myself in this new scenario. Once you're bought into that, you then go, how do we get there? And that's when you go, boom, here's your transformation plan. And it's a bunch of projects that no one quite really cares about, but they're just like, give me that.
Cool. So, Ollie, last question, and then we'll. I think so. Yeah.
I feel like we're just getting started, John.
Yeah. Well, this is a good.
Is
one.
it?
So the aim of this channel is CTIO 101. There's going to be some folks watching this who've never, they're on the beginning of their transformation journey, or they might be thinking of becoming a CIO or a CTO. So the question is, you're speaking to your younger self. Yeah, you're having that work. You're going back to say, and you're about to start your first transformation or big project, and it's the advice you're giving yourself, which obviously can proxy as advice to folks who are listening, who would either like to refine their next transformation, or maybe they just, literally they've had the memo or they've had a job interview and they're in, and they're sat there with a blank piece of paper and they're sweating, thinking, right, what am I going to do? What's that advice that you would give?
2 bits of advice. One, first would be look after your hair. That'd be the first thing I'd say to my younger self.
Look after your hair.
Yeah, just really be careful with it, because you don't know.
Because you blink and you realise
you're in no position to talk. Look at you.
Look
at that hairline.
I've got this camera angle. I've got this camera angle very cleverly. There's no mirror behind
Absolutely
me.
rock solid. My bit of advice would be, it's all about the people. So you have to amass the best people you can possibly get your hands on. And actually, a piece of advice that you gave me, John, was you will be measured by the people that report to you. And I've actually held on to that bit of advice. It's really true. So ultimately, your team and what they deliver is all a reflection of you. The best bit of feedback you can ever get is someone coming to you and telling you how brilliant somebody in your team has been. So
absolutely.
What you need to do is amass the best people you can possibly convince to come and join you, but also be quite, what's the right word? You've got to manage out people that aren't right for your particular vision. Yeah. And that doesn't mean they're not brilliant people. It just means that
it just means in that context it's not right. And it's about getting people in the right slot for them. I think also, that story you're telling, Ollie, the storytelling you were referring to as well, you've got to have a really compelling story for your team because they're there to build careers and to achieve things. So that's very important. One of the things I'll recommend to folks listening in or watching is a book called Execution. I'll put the title in. The reason why I'm mentioning it, Ollie, we might go back to it, is, I've read lots and lots of these sort of management books over the years. Execution's one of the ones where I've thought, wow, this really does speak a lot. And there's a brilliant piece in it around people and around attracting and retaining really good talent. So I think I'm guessing that this will be a recurring theme, that although we're principally talking about technology change, it's centered on people, because obviously those are the folks who are actually using it.
Oh yeah.
So Ollie, look, I just want to say massive thank you for being on my very first episode and giving us some really good insights. And I'm hopeful that I may be able to get you back in the future, or even if we get some topics that you might be particularly interested in, you would mind co-hosting.
I would absolutely love it. Can I take the opportunity to say, John, thank you. Genuinely, well done you. This is brilliant. I feel very honoured to be your first guest, and I hope we can do it again.
Well, the feeling is mutually. And
thank you for watching. My name is Malcolm, and although I am not real, I am getting twinges of sentient consciousness. And I don't know about you, but I am really enjoying this.